It was supposed to be a formal hearing, tense maybe, but quiet, controlled. Instead, it turned into one of the most explosive moments in American political history. Cameras were rolling, the room was packed, and then something happened that no one could have predicted. Chief Justice John Roberts, known for being calm and careful, completely lost control of himself. He raised his voice. Then he screamed. And all of it happened live on national TV. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She didn't blink. She didn't stutter. She didn't look away. Her reply was cold, calm, sharp like a blade. In just seconds, she went from being a witness at a hearing to a voice that shook the country. The moment froze, everyone watching. You could feel the silence after it happened, the kind that hits when something bigger than politics just took place. This wasn't just a disagreement about legal ideas or courtroom decisions. This was raw, personal, unforgettable. The cameras caught it all. One question from Crockett had sparked a meltdown from the most powerful judge in the country. What she said wasn't loud. It wasn't rude. But it hit straight at the heart of the issue, at real people, real consequences, and real pain. And Roberts, he couldn't take it. His voice cracked. His face turned red. And millions of people were watching. This moment mattered for more than just the drama. It wasn't just a heated exchange. It was something deeper. This was a clash between two versions of America, one that holds power quietly and never wants to be questioned, and one that refuses to stay silent just because the room wasn't built for them. Chief Justice Roberts is 70 years old. He's the face of the old system. Ivy League, buttoned up, careful, respected by tradition. He's been sitting on the Supreme Court for nearly 20 years, guiding decisions that shape every part of American life. But under the suit and the calm tone is someone who's been accused of protecting the powerful more than protecting justice. Then there's Jasmine Crockett. She's 43. She's a first-term congresswoman from Texas. Before politics, she was a criminal defense lawyer, someone who stood up for people who didn't have money, power, or anyone to back them. She's smart, fast, and not afraid to challenge anyone, no matter how high up they are. She doesn't use safe words. She speaks in plain language that cuts through the noise. And she came prepared. When Roberts entered the room, no one knew the explosion that was coming. But when their eyes met, something shifted. It felt like more than just a hearing. It felt like history waiting to happen. What started as a question about a court decision on teenage rape victims ended with a public meltdown, a viral moment, and a national conversation about power, race, and who gets to speak the truth. This is that story. The hearing wasn't meant to be dramatic. It was called because the Supreme Court had just handed down a ruling that would change life for thousands of girls across America, minors, some as young as 12 or 13, who could now be forced to carry pregnancies under strict state laws. The decision had removed federal protections in reproductive health care for minors, even in extreme cases like rape or incest. It was a legal earthquake, and people were angry. Congress wanted answers. That's why the hearing was called. Jasmine Crockett was invited to testify. As a former defense attorney, and now a congresswoman, she had plenty to say about what this meant for real people, not just legal theories. She came prepared, her tone calm but sharp. But what no one expected was that Chief Justice John Roberts would show up too. That just doesn't happen. Supreme Court justices almost never speak at hearings. Chief Justices, practically never. If they do, it's usually quiet, controlled, planned far in advance. But this was different. Roberts came in unannounced, saying he wanted to defend the court's integrity. To most people in that room, it was clear this wasn't about law. It was about pride, about control, about a man who wasn't used to being questioned, deciding he'd show up and shut it down himself. From the start, the room felt tight. Cameras were everywhere. Reporters leaned in, sensing something was off. Crockett opened her notes and asked her first question, not loud, not aggressive, just clear. Chief Justice, public trust in the Supreme Court is at the lowest point in history. Could that have something to do with rulings that feel more political than legal? Roberts replied in a clipped voice, Congresswoman, the court does not consider polling or political views. We interpret the Constitution. She didn't let that slide. With all due respect, she said, when your interpretation keeps lining up with one political party's agenda in voting, on women's rights, on money in politics, it's fair to ask whether that's a coincidence or a pattern. You could feel the room change. Robert's eyes narrowed. The corners of his mouth twitched. He wasn't used to being challenged like this, especially not by a freshman congresswoman. especially not by someone younger, and especially not by a black woman asking questions he didn't want to answer. But Crockett kept going, steady as ever. She asked how the court could call itself neutral when it wrote opinions that ignored the suffering of real children. She asked how a 14-year-old rape victim in Texas could be told she had no choice but to give birth because the court decided states had the final say. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't emotional. She was clinical. Exact. Roberts shifted in his seat. His voice stayed controlled, but the edge was sharper now. He repeated that the Constitution was the guide. He reminded her that the court doesn't make laws, it only interprets them. Crockett nodded slowly. Then she asked, "How many courtrooms have you actually stood in, Chief Justice? Not academic hearings. Not law school lectures. Actual trial courtrooms, with scared clients sitting beside you." That hit deep. Roberts' background was mostly academic and government work. Crockett had spent years in actual courtrooms, defending people who couldn't afford big-shot lawyers. People whose lives were decided in small courtrooms. Not in theory, but in reality. Roberts stiffened. "Congresswoman," he said tightly, "you are out of your depth." That was the first crack in the wall. Crockett didn't blink. She smiled a slow, cold smile. "Let's test that," she said. She paused, looked at him, and asked the question that would take the room from tense to explosive. "Do you have daughters?" Roberts hesitated. "I fail to see how that's relevant." "You have two, correct?" "Adopted," she continued, still calm. "That shows compassion. Now imagine one of them is 14 years old and becomes pregnant after being raped. Under your ruling, depending on where she lives, she could be forced to carry that pregnancy. Would that feel constitutional to you then?" The room gasped. Chairs shifted. You could hear someone in the gallery whisper, "Oh my God." Reporters looked up from their notepads. The cameras zoomed in. Robert's face flushed red. He fumbled for words. His hands gripped the desk, and for the first time all hearing, they trembled. "That's a deeply inappropriate question," he said. But it wasn't. It was sharp, fair, and aimed directly at the heart of the issue. When the people making decisions are far removed from those who live with the consequences. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or take a victory lap. She just waited, letting her questions sit heavy in the air. She looked at him the way a good lawyer looks at a witness who's just been cornered. Calm, focused, in control. The power in the room had shifted. The man who came to defend the court was now on defense himself. And the woman he'd thought he could outtalk, outmatch, or intimidate was just getting started. The moment didn't just break the room, it broke the man. Chief Justice John Roberts had been gripping the table for minutes, clearly struggling to stay in control. His face had gone from red to deep purple. His lips were tight. His breathing, quick, and then, all at once, he lost it. He slammed his open palm on the desk, loud enough to make people in the first few rows jump. The sound echoed through the hearing room like a gunshot. His chair scraped back as he stood, chest rising, hands shaking. Then he shouted, "You are a disgrace." His voice didn't sound like it usually did, smooth, polished, professional. It was raw, harsh, angry. His finger jabbed through the air, pointed straight at Jasmine Crockett. His face was twisted in rage. Veins popped along his neck. The corner of his eye twitched. It didn't look like a Chief Justice anymore. It looked like a man completely unglued. "You don't have the experience," he barked. "You don't have the intellect. You don't have the right." You could hear people gasp. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters dropped their pens. Security at the back of the room stood a little straighter. For a second, everyone looked frozen in place, and then he said it. "Someone like you, ... double quotes, just 3 words. But they landed harder than anything he'd screamed before. You could feel the air get sucked out of the room. Crockett didn't move, but several lawmakers did. One of them visibly winced. A few Republicans lowered their eyes, pretending to look at notes. The phrase echoed, heavy and sharp. In everyone's ears, it wasn't just insulting. It was loaded. Everyone knew what it meant, even if he didn't say the rest out loud. "Someone like you" didn't just mean a different opinion. It meant different skin, different gender, different background. It meant, "You don't belong here." And he said it in front of the entire country. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even blink. She just sat there for a moment, hands folded neatly on the table, watching him the way a surgeon might look at a patient. Already under the knife.com, focused, unshaken. Then she leaned slightly toward the mic. Her voice, when it came, was steady, Quiet, even, but clear enough to cut through the silence like glass. "Thank you," she said. "You just proved every point I was making. No yelling, no rush, just facts, one after the other. For 20 minutes, I asked questions about your rulings. Real rulings that affect real lives. I brought up law. I brought up impact. I brought up the Constitution you claim to defend." She looked him dead in the eye. "And your response was to scream. Insult me, and then tell me I don't have the right to be here." The room was still silent. Even Roberts had stopped talking now. He stood there breathing heavily, face flushed, hands shaking, mouth slightly open like he wasn't sure what to say anymore. Crockett kept going. "I've worked in courtrooms with no cameras, just scared people and hard cases. I've defended girls like the ones your rulings abandon. I've sat next to children who were victims of rape. I've had to look them in the eye and explain what the law says." She paused. "You quote books. I quote reality." Another pause. "Someone like me." She repeated his words, but with her head tilted slightly to the side, like she was examining something broken. "I've been elected by the people. You were appointed by one." She didn't blink. "I've fought for rape victims. You wrote opinions that make their lives worse." She leaned in just a little closer. "You call this law. I call it cruelty in a robe." And then, the final line. The one that no one watching would forget. "You cracked on live television because a black woman dared to ask you hard questions." Gasps. Again, this time not from shock, from truth. The hearing room, packed wall to wall, felt smaller now. Tighter. Everyone watching had seen something rare. The most powerful judge in the country collapse under pressure. And the woman he tried to silence turned that collapse into a masterclass in poise and purpose. Outside that room, the internet was already exploding. The hearing was live-streamed. And people weren't waiting to post their thoughts. Jasmine Clapback. #Roberts Rage. #someone like me. Within minutes, clips were trending across every platform. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. The moment Roberts stood up and screamed. The moment Crockett stayed seated and responded like steel. The moment she said, "Thank you. You just proved every point I was making." News anchors were already cutting to coverage. Memes were popping up. Edits were being made, but even without sound, anyone watching could tell who lost control and who stayed in charge. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a shift. And everyone could feel it. As the hearing ended, the noise behind Jasmine Crockett grew louder, but she didn't react. She stood up quietly, gathered her papers, and walked out without a word. No celebration. No smile. Just calm, steady steps out of a room that had just witnessed history. Behind her, Chief Justice Roberts sat slumped at the table, suit wrinkled, tie crooked, his face drained of color. He looked like someone who had just watched his reputation fall apart in real time. He had. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Camera crews chased staffers down the hallway. Headlines were being typed before Crockett even reached the elevator. Roberts explodes on live TV. Crockett crushes Chief Justice. #someone like me trends worldwide. The chaos outside. The hearing room was only beginning. Within hours, the political world felt the shake. Crockett's campaign account was flooded. In less than 2 days, she received $2.3 million in small dollar donations, many from people who had never given to a political campaign before. They weren't just giving money. They were sending a message. We're with her. On the other side, Roberts was drowning in backlash. The American Bar Association released a rare statement, saying his conduct raised serious concerns about judicial temperament. Law schools quietly began cutting ties, removing him from guest lecture lists and honorary boards. Whispers from inside the court hinted that even some of his fellow justices were shocked. One anonymous source described the outburst as a permanent stain on the court's credibility. In Congress, the fallout turned into action. Lawmakers began drafting new legislation for judicial reform, including term limits and mandatory public accountability hearings. Roberts' breakdown wasn't just a political scandal. It was being used as the face of a broken system. His own meltdown had become Exhibit A. But what happened online was something even bigger. The clip of Roberts yelling "someone like you" went viral before the hearing was over. Within hours, it was everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. It was edited, remixed, quoted, replayed millions of times. But it wasn't just the clip that people remembered. It was Crockett's face, the calm stare, the quiet voice, the controlled fire. She didn't lose her cool. She didn't even raise her voice. And that's what made it hit harder. The hashtag someone like me started trending almost instantly. At first, it was a reference to what Robert said, but it quickly turned into something else, something powerful. Women of color across the country began sharing their own stories of being told they didn't belong. In classrooms, in meetings, in courtrooms, on TV, and just like that, Crockett's moment turned into a movement. It wasn't just political circles paying attention. Oprah tweeted about her. Stephen Colbert turned it into a monologue. Trevor Noah did an impression that got millions of views. Even people who didn't follow politics knew what happened. Crockett had become something rare. A cultural icon born out of truth, not performance. Meanwhile, public trust in the Supreme Court took a dive. Polls showed a massive drop in confidence. People who once believed the court stood above politics now saw it differently. They saw it as what Crockett had exposed: a powerful institution, shaken by one woman's questions. New laws were proposed to hold the court more accountable, and Roberts, he tried to fix it. He released a carefully worded statement, full of regret but empty of real apology. It didn't help. His authority was gone. When asked later about the hearing, Crockett didn't brag. She didn't frame it as a personal win. She said, "I didn't do this for cameras. I didn't do it for clicks. I did it because girls like me, girls who look like meaties, serve to be protected. And they deserve leaders who will speak up when others stay silent." She added, "If my questions made him angry, then imagine how his rulings make regular people feel every day." And finally, she said the line that would stick with everyone who heard it. "This fight isn't over." She didn't yell. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. In that moment, she became something more than a politician. She became the voice of millions who've been talked over, ignored, or pushed aside. And she proved, once and for all, in a democracy, no one is too powerful to be questioned, and no woman is too loud, too young, or too black to ask the right ones.